Hello and welcome to podcast episode number 1 of the Christian Unity Book Club. My name's Renita Wallace, and we're here discussing books related to both Christianity and racial, ethnic, and even cultural differences because as Christians, we are all one body, but Christians are diverse too. Today, we're going to be talking about the book God's Double Agent by Bob Fu. And the goal in introducing the book God's Double Agent is to highlight the experiences of Chinese Christians who experience extreme physical, mental, and emotional persecution as a result of their Christian faith. Americans in general have not experienced hardcore persecution solely as a result of their religious faith. So the intent of reading Bob Fu's autobiography is to show that the Christian experience can often be a matter of life and death for many Asian Christians. And as Asian Christians were given a religious asylum and allowed to relocate here in the United States, reading and discussing this book will hopefully show that even among American Christians, there will be differing types of Christian experiences with different viewpoints based on the racial, ethnic, cultural exposure and their experiences. I was aware that there was Christianity, or a persecution of Christianity rather, in China, and I was also very aware that as a result of that, China had a extensive house church movement, meaning that because people weren't able to come together and meet in a separate church building, not many anyway, that as a result, people would get together and they would meet in secret. They would meet at homes. They would meet in just different meeting places. And so these became known as house churches. And the house church movement became very prevalent among the Christian community in China and helped to spread Christianity throughout China. So I was very familiar with that. But Bob Fu's book gave me a perspective as an individual who was in that environment. And it's nice to see it from an individual perspective because a lot of times we think about laws and we think about news, but we don't necessarily think about a person. So this is a person who's walking through the laws, who's walking through the news and how it affects him as a human being. So the first question I asked myself, was there anything that really surprised me about this book? Something that I did not expect. And I have to admit, the one thing that really surprised me that I wasn't looking for and didn't expect was the information that he gave about women who were pregnant and who were expecting in China. Now, for many years, I knew through history that there was a one-child policy for a long time, meaning that a family unit could not have more than one child. And if they had more than one, they weren't allowed to. But the process or the walking out of, or how they actually managed to keep people in line with that is what really kind of took me by surprise. Because here in the Midwest, or even here in the United States, the western part of the world, pregnancy and childbirth is a choice. You may get pregnant accidentally, but it's still a choice, and it is still something that, for all intents and purposes, is usually looked forward to because it's bringing a new life into the world. Whereas they were in a situation, and the women that he described were in situations where they found themselves being pregnant, but it wasn't a joyous experience because technically they were doing something that was outlawed. And he mentioned in the book that women would have to go, I guess they went to a clinic or they went to a doctor or somewhere every month, and they would take a test, like a pregnancy test, to show that they weren't pregnant. And if they were pregnant and it was a child that was deemed by the government to be expendable, then they would go and they would be given abortions. And those women who did not submit to this had to go into hiding, or they had to find ways to hide their pregnancy. And if they were discovered, they were forcibly given abortions, even in late term, in terms of it being like a week or two before the due date. That is how Bob Fu described it. And so that was very surprising to me because it is something that my mindset as a Westerner, I just don't think in those terms. I mean, to be in danger because you're doing something that your body is designed to do, to bring life into the world. And that is something that is dangerous. That is something against the law. And so that was a mindset that I really had to stop and think about it, because one of the things that we say now is my body, my choice. But what if it's your body, but it's not your choice? And that's what the Chinese women were facing there. So then the question I would ask is there a scene, a story, or an anecdote in the book that stood out to me? And the one that stood out to me was their escape from China. First of all, they were being followed by, I guess, police or communist officials or whoever it was that decided to follow them and monitor their actions. So they decided that they would have to leave separately in order to keep suspicion away from themselves. So Bob's wife, Heidi, left separately. She covered herself up, and she was also pregnant at this time, which made things very dangerous for her. So she left separately, and then Bob stayed behind. And in order to escape without being detected, he had to jump into shrubs, a group of shrubs from a second floor window. And so he jumped just hoping and praying that he would not get hurt in the jump to the point where he was not be able to travel. Fortunately, he did survive the jump. He was not hurt and he was able to travel. He and his wife made it to Hong Kong. And then once they got to Hong Kong, they were there. They started applying for their papers to be able to come to the United States as refugees and seek political asylum. And then all of a sudden, they get the news that China is getting ready to take over Hong Kong. So they have to get out before China takes over. Otherwise, they're in the same position as they were when they were back in China. So that was a really interesting story in the fact that simply because they are Christians, now they didn't do anything else. They didn't break any laws. All they were is Christians. And because of this, they had this extreme persecution, and they basically had to run for their lives and run for their freedom just because of that. Now, what were some of the moral and ethical issues brought up in the book? One of the main ones to me was the matter of choice. Do you choose your own religion? Do you choose whether or not you have life or death? Where we live, in the way we think, because of our cultural mindsets, we think of having choices, being free. And they had no choices. Even when Bob described his younger days going through school, and he pursued university because that would give him more options as he got older in terms of being able to work, being able, finding gainful employment. Education was the key for him. But if he did not have that, he would have had no choices. And even with that, he still had limited choices in terms of what he was able to believe, how he could express it, how he could live his life, how he and his wife could live their lives. And that is a tremendously different mindset than Christians in Western countries who really never have to think in those terms of what will you do when Christianity is outlawed. Not only is it just not, I don't mean just put down, but I mean truly and completely outlawed. How would you live? What would you do? What choices would you make? Even when you technically don't have any choices, would you still choose to follow God under those conditions? So those are the things that we don't have to think about in terms of it being life or death. Now, do you think Bob Fu was destined to be what you call a radical Christian leader? Or could you see him having taken a different path? What was it about him that made him who he turned out to be? One of the things that stood out to me in terms of Bob's character was his intense voraciousness about international actions, political actions, and how those things affected the world. So his mindset was always outside of what he could see in his city, in his college, in his hometown. He was always looking outside. And that was a strong reminder of someone who has decided, or who even has it innately in him, to live bigger than what he sees, bigger than what his life says he should be. And so I do think that his mindset, his desires, all gave him the wherewithal to be able to pursue outside of his normal culture, and basically to go places and do things that he would maybe never have even had a chance to do had he just stayed in his place, so to speak. But that was within him, the desire to know about cultures, the desire to know about international politics. He even participated in Tiananmen Square, the revolt, or the protests, rather, not revolt, the Tiananmen Square protests before they turned violent and became the Tiananmen Square massacre. So he even had a chance to even express his political beliefs in ways that normal people in that population would not have been able to. So I do believe that he was going to be a leader of a different type simply because of the interests that he expressed and because they were different from what he told of the people around him. Now, as we all know, Bob Fu came to the United States. He and his wife and his family came over here as refugees. And so he's here, and he runs the nonprofit group China Aid, which helps to aid persecuted Christians. Now, that's something that he would not be able to do had he not stepped outside of his comfort zone, had he not had those desires within him to know what was going on in the world, to do more than the options that were placed in front of him. And so for that reason, I think it is an excellent book. It is an excellent example of seeing and learning about the mindset of someone who has to walk out Christianity in a different way than what we as Westerners are able to do or can do. So my name's Renita Wallace. We're ending today. Thank you for joining us, and be sure to come back again to the Christian Unity Book Club.